They told me my husband Marcus died overseas. I'm 7 months pregnant, and every night since, the same dream shows me one detail: the second drawer on the left side of his desk. Nobody's checked it yet, Marcus. I've started saying his name out loud in empty rooms, just to see if it still feels true when I say it myself. It doesn't. Not the way a funeral is supposed to make things feel true. I write obituaries for a living. 411 of them, as of the morning the Lakefront Herald ran his. I have a system. Find the one detail that makes a stranger's life matter to who never met them. The diner booth a man sat in every Sunday for 40 years. The porch a woman painted the same shade of blue 3 times because she never got it quite right. I am good at finding that detail in other people's lives. It took me 9 days to understand I already had one for my own. Every year on my birthday, I write my own obituary. It started as a joke on my 3rd year at the desk and turned into a habit I never explained well to anyone who hadn't sat where I sit. You spend enough hours writing the last word on other people's stories, you start wanting to control your own. I keep the drafts in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. Marcus used to kiss the top of my head on his way to bed while I finished that year's version. Morbid, he'd say. Efficient, I'd correct him. Somebody was going to have to write mine eventually. I just liked the idea that it would be accurate. I did not get to write his. The call came at 4:47 in the morning 9 days ago, from a number with a country code I had to look up. A single-car accident on the coastal road outside Lisbon, where Marcus had spent 6 weeks finishing the hotel renovation that was supposed to make Doyle and Whitcomb Hospitality Group a name people recognized outside the Midwest. The car went off the road before dawn. It burned before anyone reached it. What they recovered was enough for a provisional identification and not enough for a funeral home to let me see him one more time. I was 7 months pregnant when I first heard the word remains. I have thought about that word more in 9 days than in 11 years of writing it for other families. Dale Whitcomb, Marcus's partner since business school, told me to sit down before he said anything else. He flew back from Lisbon 2 days later with a folder of paperwork and a face arranged into the practiced sympathy I recognized from 1,000 funeral home lobbies. He'd personally couriered Marcus's watch back across an ocean instead of shipping it, told me hand over his heart, that he couldn't let a stranger carry the last thing that touched him. I thought it was grief. I hadn't yet thought to ask why a man who ran $100 million company had made himself the one holding my husband's watch. I named our daughter that week, alone in a hospital waiting room, because Marcus and I had agreed on it in April and I couldn't stand the idea of the decision dying with him. Wren, small and plain and built for flying anyway. Then the dream started. The first night, I told myself it was grief doing ordinary things to a tired brain. By the 9th night I stopped telling myself anything, because the dream never changed, not once, not by a single detail, and that is not how grief usually behaves. In the dream I'm standing in the home office Marcus barely used, in front of the cherrywood desk his father gave him, the kind of desk men buy when they've decided they're the kind of men who have a desk, 3 drawers on the left side. I only ever look at the second one. I never open it. Something in my chest tells me, that one, not the others, that one. I told Priya first, because Priya has run the obituary desk beside me for 6 years, and has never once looked at me like I was being dramatic. She listened to the whole thing and didn't tell me I was imagining it. She told me to write it down, the way I write everything down, which is the closest thing to being believed that I know how to receive right now. Constance did not receive it the same way. "You're 7 months pregnant and your husband is dead," my mother-in-law said, in the voice she uses for people she considers slightly beneath the family, a voice that had apparently now widened to include me. "Your brain is trying to give you something to hold on to. That's not a message, Nora. That's just what grief does to a woman who's about to be alone with a baby." She said alone like it was already decided, like she'd already done the math on what I'd be worth to this family without Marcus attached to my name. I opened my notepad instead, and under 9 nearly identical entries, I wrote, "Second drawer left side. Someone needs to open it. It is not going to be Constance." The text came 2 nights later from a number I didn't recognize. "You're not crazy," it said. "Look again, left side, second drawer, don't tell Dale." I sat on the bathroom floor at 11 at night reading those 4 sentences until the screen dimmed. Nobody knew about the dream except Priya and Constance. I hadn't put second drawer anywhere but a private notepad on a phone with a passcode Marcus picked, one I still used because changing it had felt, for 9 days, like erasing him one keystroke at a time. "Who is this?" I typed back. No answer, not that night, not the next morning when I stood in my own kitchen holding the phone like it might ring on its own. I did the only thing I know how to do with information I can't verify, the same thing I do with every unconfirmed detail that lands on my desk before it goes near print. I went looking for a second source. I did not tell Dale Whitcomb about the text. I noticed, with a cold little clarity that surprised me, that I hadn't needed the message to warn me not to. Some part of me had already decided that on its own. Detective Elena Cruz showed up on a Tuesday, badge out before I'd finished opening the door, looking at my stomach before she looked at my face, which I'd come to learn was just how she took in a room. Inventory first, sympathy later, if at all. "I have questions about the accident," she said, and then asked me nothing about the accident. She asked about the life insurance policy. $2.1 million, taken out 14 months earlier, right around when the Lisbon project started bleeding money it wasn't supposed to bleed. She asked if I'd noticed Marcus behaving differently. She asked, without quite asking, whether I'd had anything to do with a dead man's finances. "You think I did this?" I said, not a question. "I think a lot of people fake their own deaths for a lot less than $2 million and a company on the edge of a bad quarter," she said. "I think it's usually the wife who knows first, or the wife who's owed an explanation when she doesn't. I haven't decided which one you are yet." It should have made me hate her. Instead, watching her do that flat, unblinking inventory of my living room, my prenatal vitamins on the counter, the photo of Marcus and me on a boat we never owned, I felt something closer to relief. She was the first person in 9 days treating this like it might not be finished. "There's a text," I told her before I'd decided to. Cruz read the message twice. Her face didn't change, which told me more than if it had. "Don't show that to Whitcomb," she said, and stood to leave. "And Mrs. Doyle, start locking your back door." She was gone before I could ask why a homicide detective was suddenly worried about my back door instead of my alibi. "I have a source at the county records office, a clerk named Hollis Pratt who owes me a favor from 3 years ago, when I spent a weekend helping his mother's obituary read, like she'd been a person instead of a list of surviving relatives." Hollis pulled the provisional identification report off the books, the way I'd pulled 100 small favors for grieving families and never once thought I'd be cashing one in for myself. The dental records had been matched by a doctor in Lisbon, working from files transmitted by the company's Portugal office. Standard, except the transmission timestamp was 11 hours before the accident was officially reported to local police. I read that line 4 times before it stopped rearranging itself into something less impossible. Somebody had sent dental records to identify a body before that body existed as a case. Cruz didn't sound surprised when I called her, which told me she already suspected and had been waiting to see if I'd find it myself. She had me meet her in a parking garage on Wabash, and told me the parts she'd been sitting on. Doyle and Whitcomb was 6 weeks from a covenant default on the loan financing the Lisbon renovation, the kind of default lets a lender call an entire note due at once. Whitcomb had spent 4 months quietly roading the restructuring through a private lender called Voss Bridge Lending, and Voss Bridge Lending had a file in Cruz's unit 3 inches thick, none of it about hospitality financing. "Your husband didn't end up owing a man like Grady Voss by accident," Cruz said. "Somebody hands you that phone number. Somebody tells you it's the only option left." "Dale," I said. "I can't prove that yet," Cruz said. "But I've stopped believing it's a coincidence that the partner with the motive is also the partner standing closest to the finish line when your husband's name turned into a payout instead of a person." Here is what I don't tell Cruz, because it isn't evidence, it's just mine. The way Marcus used to sit at that desk with his reading glasses low on his nose, doing math on a legal pad because he never fully trusted a spreadsheet until he'd checked it by hand. The way he'd catch me watching from the doorway and say, without looking up, "You're doing the thing where you write my obituary just by looking at me," and I'd say no, and he'd say liar, and I'd tell him the line anyway. Devoted husband, terrible with drawers. Somehow still the best thing that happened to a woman who spends her whole career writing endings. We picked Ren's name at that desk in April, both of us hunched over a baby book Priya gave us as a joke that stopped being a joke around page 40. He put his hand flat on my stomach that night and told her, "Not me, you're going to have to be tougher than both of us. Your mother writes about the dead and your father does math for a living. Somebody in this family has to be interesting." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. That's the last full memory I have of him without a coastal road folded into it. I've started rationing it, The way you ration the last of something you're not sure you'll get more of. Second drawer left side. Somebody needs to open it. I stopped being able to tell the difference between missing him and being warned by him somewhere around night 14. The Doyle family held what Constance insisted on calling a gathering of remembrance instead of a funeral, elegant enough for the society pages, in a ballroom Doyle and Whitcomb had renovated the year Marcus and I got married. I stood in a black dress that didn't fit anymore, one hand flat against my stomach like it was the only part of the room I still trusted. Constance found me by the memorial photo board. She looked at my stomach the way she'd looked at it since the day we told her we were expecting, like she was doing math she didn't like the answer to. People are going to ask about the timeline, she said, low enough that only I could hear it, pleasant enough that anyone watching would see a mother-in-law offering comfort. The wedding and then this, so fast. I've had 3 conversations already. She smiled at someone over my shoulder, waved, dropped her voice back down. I'd rather you hear it from me. Some people are wondering whose baby that really is. I have written 411 obituaries. I did not know, until that exact second, standing under a photo of my husband at his own wedding, that I had it in me to want to overturn a memorial table in front of 200 people. Say that again, I said, slowly. I want to quote you correctly. I do that for a living. Something flickered across her face, the closest thing to a mask slip I'd seen from her in 11 years, gone as fast as it came. I'm simply saying what people are already saying, Nora. No, I said. You're the one saying it. You're just hoping I'll be too tired and too pregnant to notice you're the source. I walked away past 100 people who had no idea that 4 floors up, in Dale Whitcomb's office, there was a folder with my name on it, and a buyout offer he was already drafting off a dead man's signature that wasn't dead yet. I didn't know that part yet either. I would, in 6 days. But I remember exactly how cold my hands were walking out of that ballroom, like some part of me already knew there was a second betrayal in the building, and just hadn't found the door to it. That night the second text came. She was cruel to you tonight, it said. I'm sorry, I can't come to you yet. Trust Cruz. Don't trust the buyout papers, whatever Dale calls them. I love you. Tell when I picked the name too. I read it standing in my bathroom with the water running so the sound would cover whatever noise I made. Nobody knew I'd been crying in a ballroom 4 hours earlier, except the people who'd been in that ballroom. Nobody knew about buyout papers except whoever was sending me these messages, and I didn't have that detail myself yet. Marcus, I typed, deleted, typed again and sent. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Not yet, the reply said. Soon, open the drawer, Nora, before Dale does. Then nothing. I sat on that bathroom floor for 40 minutes thinking about the word yet. A man who was either my husband, coming back to me one careful sentence at a time, or someone who knew every soft place in my life well enough to sound exactly like him. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I still don't think I've fully decided. Grady Voss found me in the parking lot of my obstetrician's office, which is the detail I keep returning to, out of everything that happened those 6 weeks. Not the funeral, not the texts. The fact that a man who'd loaned my husband money at a rate that should be illegal knew my prenatal schedule better than my own mother did. He was leaning against my car like he'd been invited, compact, unhurried, dressed like a man who owned a golf course, which it turned out he did, because Voss Bridge Lending laundered exactly the way you'd expect. Mrs. Doyle. He tried the name on like a coat. Real sorry about your husband. Marcus was a good customer. Prompt, before things got complicated. I don't know you, I said, steadier than I felt. No. But you're carrying something that matters to me. Marcus owed me $410,000 when that car went off the road, and dead men are real bad at making payments. He smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. You've got a check coming and a company worth a lot more once Whitcomb finishes cleaning house, and a baby who's going to need a mother who isn't spending the next decade looking over her shoulder. I'd hate for this to get complicated the way it got complicated for him. He reached out and rested 2 fingers against my stomach for exactly 1 second, before I stepped back into the side of my own car hard enough to bruise my hip. Don't, I said, and he was already walking away, unbothered. 10 days, he called back, not turning around. Tell Whitcomb the clock's the same for everybody. Cruz was at my apartment in 11 minutes, a response time I hadn't earned as a person of interest. He touched you, she said, not a question. Fine. You're not fine, you're pregnant and a loan shark just threatened your kid in a parking lot. Those aren't the same thing. No comfort in it, and somehow it was the most comforting sentence anyone had said to me in 6 weeks, because it didn't ask me to perform being okay. 10 days isn't a Voss deadline. Voss runs open tabs until he decides to close them. Somebody gave him a date. The buyout clause, I said. The forced sale window, Cruz said, already moving. After a confirmed death, I need to see that partnership agreement. I went back to work 3 days later, mostly because Priya told me sitting alone with a countdown in my head was a worse plan than any plan involving other people. You look like hell, she said, sliding a coffee across my desk I couldn't drink and appreciate it anyway. She pulled her chair around to my side, the way she does when she's about to actually help instead of just being kind about it. Whitcomb's assistant called yesterday, asking if you were planning a correction, wanted to know if you'd found any discrepancies in the reporting. My stomach dropped somewhere near my shoes. I haven't told anyone here what I found. Which means either your phone's been read or somebody's phishing. She pulled up the county clerk's public portal, the most boring database in the building, until about 4 minutes earlier. We spent 2 hours in it, the way we've spent 100 boring afternoons fact-checking somebody's dead grandmother's job history, except this time we were looking for the exact date the operating agreement had been amended to add a forced sale clause. 11 months earlier, 4 months before the Lisbon project started bleeding money, 4 months before anyone but Dale Whitcomb had a single reason to think Marcus Doyle might die young. That's not a clause you add for a healthy 41-year-old man, Priya said quietly. That's a clause you add when you already know you're going to need it. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Marcus's office at 11 o'clock with a screwdriver from the kitchen junk drawer, looking at the second drawer on the left side of a desk his father gave him, the only drawer in our apartment that had ever been locked. I want to be honest about what finally broke because I don't think it was grief, not exactly. It was Grady Voss's fingers on my stomach. It was Constance asking in front of 200 people, whose baby I was carrying. It was 9 days of being told, gently or not, that the thing my body knew was true didn't count as knowing. I put the screwdriver under the lock and didn't ask permission from the dream or from Marcus, or from anyone. I leaned my whole weight into it until the brass gave with a crack I felt in my back teeth. Inside, a slim black ledger, the kind Marcus always kept because he never fully trusted a spreadsheet. A flash drive taped to the inside cover, hidden on purpose, not by accident. Underneath both, folded in thirds, a page in the handwriting I'd know in the dark. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't come back the easy way, and I'm sorry. I need you to be smarter than I was for the next 2 weeks. Everything in the ledger is what Dale's been doing to the Lisbon financing since March. The account numbers, the wire dates, the calls with Voss. I should have gone to the police the day he introduced us instead of believing him when he said it was the only way to save the company. Don't be wrong the way I was. Trust the numbers, not the man who's about to hand you flowers. I'm alive. I need you to believe that and act like it's already proven, because acting like you already know is the only way I get to actually come home. Kiss Ren for me. I'll tell her the whole story myself soon, in a version where it's already funny instead of terrifying. I love you. Open the drawer before Dale does. You're already too late for that. Open it before the buyout papers get signed instead. N. I read it 4 times on the floor of an office that still smelled like him, one hand flat against my stomach where Ren was doing slow, ordinary rolls, entirely unaware her mother had just stopped being a widow and started being something with no good word yet. Not a wife, not exactly. Not a woman waiting, a woman with a deadline. The ledger was 200 pages. I didn't understand half it yet. I called Priya. Then I called Cruz. Then, for the first time in 9 days, I let myself cry the way I hadn't at the funeral, loud and relieved, on the floor of a room that wasn't locked anymore. Cruz brought a forensic accountant named Beth Marsh, quiet and precise, who looked at 200 handwritten pages the way I look at raw facts before I've found the sentence that makes them a story. It took 6 hours to understand what Marcus had spent 4 months documenting. A shell vendor, paid for renovation materials that never arrived, routed straight back into an account Whitcomb controlled. A financing gap that appeared 4 months after the forced sale clause was added. And when the gap got too large to explain in board meetings, Whitcomb had personally introduced Marcus to Grady Voss, framing predatory money as the only quiet solution left, the kind a proud man takes when his partner tells him it's the only way to protect the company his name is on. He built the hole and handed Marcus the shovel, Beth said, tapping a highlighted line. then stood there looking sympathetic while your husband dug himself into it. That's not proof of the accident, Cruz said, always the flattest voice in the room, which I'd come to understand was its own kind of kindness. That's fraud and motive. It's not proof he staged what happened on that road. It's proof he had every reason to make sure Marcus never came back to explain it, I said. Priya scrolled to the ledger's last pages, closest to the accident date, and went quiet. There's a wire here. 2 days before the crash, $40,000 routed through Voss Bridge Lending. Memo line blank. She looked up. Payment for a job or payment for silence. I don't think there's a version where it's neither. Cruz was already on her phone. I need that warrant today, she said to whoever picked up. I thought about the watch. Whitcomb flying home 2 days after the accident, personally couriering it across an ocean instead of shipping it, hand over his heart, telling me he couldn't let a stranger carry the last thing that touched him. I'd thought it was grief. I understood now it was reconnaissance. He hadn't been checking on me. He'd been checking whether I'd started looking yet. I went to Constance's house instead of calling, because some conversations don't survive a phone line. You said alone, I told her, still in my coat, the day after the accident, like it was already decided, not if the worst is true, already decided, like you already knew there wasn't a version where I got to grieve him and be wrong about it. Constance Doyle, who had spent 11 years making sure I understood how replaceable I was in this family, sat down slowly by the window, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked old. He called me, she said, not to say goodbye, to ask me not to fall apart in front of you, because he needed you to believe it completely, or Dale was wrong the second he saw your face at the memorial. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against her knees. I've spent 9 days watching you grieve my son while I knew he was alive, because he asked me to, and because some part of me was furious enough at what Dale had done to our family that I wanted him to have every advantage a head start could buy. You let me stand in a ballroom while you humiliated me about whose baby this is, I said. My voice didn't shake, and I was almost proud of that. You let Voss put his hands on me in a parking lot. You let me sleep 4 feet from a locked drawer for 9 nights, going quietly out of my mind. 1 sentence from you. Could have what? She said, and for once there was no performance in it. Made you safer? You reacted exactly the way you needed to react for this to work. Grief. Real grief. Nobody performs it as well as someone who isn't performing it at all. Her eyes were wet, which was somehow worse than if she'd stayed cold. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you so you stop wasting the little time you have left being angry at the wrong Doyle. I didn't forgive her. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where every wound gets stitched shut the second the person holding the needle admits they're the one who cut you. I told her I needed her out of my life until I decided otherwise, and she nodded like she'd expected exactly that verdict. But I believed her, and believing her meant I wasn't counting down from 4 days anymore. I was counting down from 2. Here is what I did not see happen and only pieced together after. Dale Whitcomb, in his glass office 40 floors above the river, got a call from a records clerk he'd been quietly paying for exactly this kind of warning. Someone had pulled the operating agreement. Someone had asked pointed questions about a clause added 11 months ago. He did not panic out loud. He made 3 calls instead. 1 moved the shareholder vote up, citing the family's need for closure. 1 went to Grady Voss short and cold, ending with make sure there's nothing left to find her with. The last, shortest of all, went to a burner phone in a rented apartment overseas, where the only man who could contradict Dale Whitcomb's version of the last 4 months was currently living under a name that wasn't his. Whitcomb hung up and straightened his cuffs, practicing his face in the window's reflection for the memorial he was about to help finish planning. Grief this size, he told himself, didn't need to know how long it had really lasted. Priya saw the filing first, an emergency shareholder meeting, called by Chairman Dale Whitcomb, scheduled for the morning after the memorial, to formalize leadership continuity following the tragic loss of co-founder Marcus Doyle. Formalize, as if grief were paperwork you filed once and never revisited. That's 18 hours from now, Priya said. Cruz's warrant, when it finally cleared, triggered an internal alert at the bank, which triggered a call to Whitcomb's outside counsel, who was, it turned out, also on Voss Bridge Lending's retainer. Whoever had been protecting Whitcomb for months knew, within the hour, that we were close. That night my apartment was broken into. Nothing taken except the flash drive, which I'd foolishly left in the desk instead of on me, and the ledger, 200 handwritten pages that were the only paper trail tying Whitcomb's fraud together. I stood in Marcus's ruined office at midnight, the drawer hanging open on its broken lock, and felt something in my chest cave in that I'd been holding up through sheer refusal for 11 days. Then my phone rang, unknown number. I answered already knowing it wasn't going to be him. "You should have stopped when Grady asked nicely," Dale Whitcomb said, his voice so warm, so exactly the voice that had told me I'm so sorry. Nora 2 hours earlier at the memorial, that for a second my whole body refused to believe it belonged to the same sentence. "I really am sorry it's come to this. Marcus was my best friend for 20 years. Everything I've done to protect what we built. I need you to sign the buyout tomorrow at the vote in front of everyone so this can finally be over." He paused and I heard, faintly, another voice in the background, muffled, familiar enough to stop my heart mid-beat. "Grady's men found where Marcus has been staying." I'd hate for the ending to be sadder than it needs to be, for a story that's already had enough tragedy in it. The line went dead. I stood in the doorway of a room with no proof left in it, 7 months and 3 weeks pregnant, holding a phone with nothing on it and a husband somewhere on the other side of an ocean, who might not have 18 hours left either. Second drawer, left side. I had opened it exactly when it told me to. I just hadn't understood until that moment that opening it was only the first half of the dream. I called Cruz. "They took the ledger," I said. "They have Marcus." "Say that slower," Cruz said, already moving, keys jangling, a door opening. "Marcus is alive and they have him, or Marcus is alive and Whitcomb's bluffing that they have him?" I hadn't thought to ask myself that, and the fact that Cruz had, instantly, told me exactly why I'd trusted her since that parking garage, I don't know. Then we plan for the worst one and hope for the better one. A pause. Beth backed up every page of that ledger to a secure drive the first night we read it. Standard practice. Whitcomb doesn't know that. He thinks he just won. Something in my chest unclenched half an inch, which was not nothing. "The vote's in the same room as the memorial reception," Cruz said. "Public. Press invited, because Whitcomb wants witnesses to how gracefully the company handles tragedy. He built himself a stage. We're going to use it." We stayed up until 3 in the morning building the only kind of plan that ever works in a room full of people who think they already know the ending. Cruz would have officers positioned outside, not in, so nothing looked staged until it needed to. Beth would have the restored ledger data ready to project the moment Cruz gave the signal. I would do the one thing I actually know how to do better than anyone else in that ballroom. Stand up in front of a room that came to hear a eulogy and tell them the truth the way I tell it for a living, one unbearable, specific detail at a time. "And Marcus," I said, because that was the piece none of us could plan around. "If Whitcomb's bluffing, he shows up to save face and we've got him," Cruz said. "If he's not bluffing, we move fast enough that it doesn't matter which turns out to be true." I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed with my hand on my stomach, feeling Ren turn over, slow and unbothered, entirely unaware that by this time tomorrow she was either going to have a father, or a mother who'd stopped at nothing trying to get her one. The ballroom looked exactly like it had 11 days earlier, memorial photo board and all, except this time there was a podium set up for the vote and a folding table with a stack of buyout papers waiting for my signature, and 200 people who thought they'd come to watch a grieving widow let her husband's company move on. Whitcomb found me before I found him, hand on my elbow, voice pitched low and warm for the cameras near the door. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "For the baby. Marcus would want you taken care of." "You keep telling me what Marcus would want," I said. "You're the only person in this room who talks about him like you already know how the story ends." Something flickered behind his eyes, gone as fast as it came, the same practiced recovery I'd mistaken for warmth in 100 small moments over 11 years. He smiled and moved toward the podium. I let him get through 4 minutes of remarks about legacy before I stood up. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, my voice carrying further than I'd let it carry in 11 years of standing quietly at the edges of rooms like this one, "I'd like to read something. It's an obituary. I'm good at this part. Finding the one detail that makes strangers understand exactly who somebody was." Whitcomb's smile didn't move, but his hand on the podium went very still. "Dale Whitcomb added a forced sale clause to his partnership agreement with my husband 11 months ago," I said. Behind me, on the screen Beth had wired into the ballroom's own projector 20 minutes earlier, the amendment appeared, dated, notarized, undeniable. 4 months before a project he was quietly sabotaging started bleeding money it wasn't supposed to bleed. 4 months before he personally introduced my husband to a man named Grady Voss, who is sitting in the third row, in case anyone wants to ask him about Voss Bridge Lending's real business. The room did the thing rooms do when a story turns without permission: a held breath, chairs creaking, somebody's water glass set down too hard. Voss did not run. I watched him go carefully still instead, doing the same math I imagined he'd done in that parking garage, deciding in real time which version of loyalty was still worth keeping. 2 days before my husband's car went off a road he'd driven 50 times without incident, I said, Dale Whitcomb wired $40,000 through Voss Bridge Lending. The memo line is blank. I'd love for someone to tell me what favor costs exactly $40,000, 2 days before a man's car catches fire. This is grief, Whitcomb said, his voice losing its warmth, gone thin and fast in a way that told the room more than any document could. She's not well. Everyone here can see she's not well. I have a ledger, I said over him, because I've spent 11 years learning exactly how much room a steady voice can take up in a space that wants to talk over it. Handwritten, 200 pages. My husband kept it because he never trusted a spreadsheet, and because some part of him knew, months before that road, he was going to need proof he wasn't the one who did this to his own company. Where is it? Whitcomb said, and it wasn't a question. It was a threat with the shape sanded off for the cameras, and it was the first true thing he'd said all night. That was when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. I didn't turn around right away. For one full second I stood at that podium and finished the sentence I was in the middle of, because some stubborn, exhausted part of me needed Whitcomb to hear the whole truth land before I let myself hope for anything else in that room. Then I turned and Marcus was standing in the doorway, thinner than I remembered, one arm in a sling, flanked by 2 officers Cruz had positioned exactly where she'd promised. 200 people who'd come to watch his company move on without him instead watched him walk down the center aisle of his own memorial alive, toward a wife who'd stopped, somewhere in the last 11 days, being able to tell the difference between a miracle and a woman who simply refused to stop looking. Sorry I'm late, he said in the exact dry voice I'd fallen in love with 11 years earlier. Traffic. Somebody laughed, a single startled bark of it, and the room broke into the kind of noise a room makes when it realizes, all at once, that it walked in for one story and is about to leave with a completely different one. Whitcomb didn't run either. There wasn't anywhere left to run to. He stood very still at the podium he'd built for himself, in the room he'd chosen for the cameras, while 2 officers who'd been standing quietly by the memorial photo board for 40 minutes moved toward him instead of toward me. Grady Voss gave a full statement to Cruz Department by that Friday. Once it was clear loyalty to Dale Whitcomb had never once run both directions. It's the only decent thing I will ever hear about that man, and I take it exactly as seriously as it deserves. Not very. Marcus reached me before I reached him, which felt right after 11 days of being the one who did all the reaching. Second drawer, I said because it was the only sentence that felt big enough. Left side. I know, he said and put his hand flat against my stomach, right where his mother's cruelty had landed and Voss's fingers had landed and 11 days of grief had landed, and for the first time since a phone rang at 4:47 in the morning, it felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. His hand. Not a threat, not a countdown, just his hand. Still terrible with drawers, he said. Better with everything else, I promise. Ren was born 3 weeks later, 6 days early, loud about it in a way that made the delivery nurse laugh and tell me some babies just don't believe in slow entrances. Marcus was in the room this time, cast finally off, holding my hand hard enough to bruise, which felt like exactly the right amount of hard. Dale Whitcomb is out on bail awaiting trial on 11 counts of fraud, and a 12th charge the DA's office is still deciding how to word, because there isn't yet a clean legal category for staging a man's death to steal his company out from under his pregnant wife. Grady Voss testified against him in exchange for a plea deal, which tells you everything you need to know about the kind of loyalty men like that actually deal in. I didn't write any of it up for the Herald. Some stories I've learned you don't get to be the one who writes the ending for, even when you were there for every terrible word of the middle. Constance came to the hospital. She stood in the doorway a long time before she came in, the way you stand at the edge of something you're not sure you're allowed back into. She didn't ask to hold Ren. She just asked if she could sit, and I said yes. because somewhere around the ninth night of this whole impossible thing I'd decided I was done deciding who deserved forgiveness based on how good their apology sounded, and started deciding it based on what people did next instead. We're not finished, she and I don't think we ever fully will be. But she sits in the chair by the window most Sundays now, and that's further than I expected to let her back in 6 months ago. Marcus still won't use the desk. He says he can't look at it without thinking about the last time he sat there writing a letter he wasn't sure would ever get read. I told him that's fine. I moved my own drawer of yearly obituaries into it instead, and this year on my birthday, I wrote something different than I have in 11 years. Nora Doyle, 34. Survived by a husband who came back, a daughter who arrived early and loud, and a mother-in-law who is, against every prior piece of available evidence, still trying. 'Cause nothing yet. Ask again in 50 years. Marcus read it over my shoulder and laughed until he had to sit down, the same way I did the night he told Ren she'd need to be the interesting one in the family. Still terrible at endings, he said. No, I said, I finally got a good one. I just had to write it myself. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.